So, who won the election? Oops, now we're banned on YouTube. I'm sorry, Mr. Producer. But really, the whole thing with election fraud, is it disenfranchisement or is it political hockey? What are we really doing with this election? And really, where does the truth lie? Can we trust our voting systems? Can we trust our politicians? Well, that's an interesting question, and let's dig into it today on When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, John Arthur Fiala. So, there have been a lot of allegations that have gone back and forth on what really happened on November 3rd, November 4th, say in the TCF Center in Detroit, where they counted a lot of mail-in ballots for Wayne County. Or how about Georgia? Well, all of this has culminated in a lawsuit that Texas filed. I don't know if you heard about this, Mr. Producer, but 17 states have now actually joined this lawsuit. So that's an interesting thing. We'll get into that. But is there really anything to it? Well, first, let's talk about our voting system and how it works and the purpose of voting for electors. So a lot of people, don't quite understand how the Electoral College works. And the Electoral College is a very interesting system. The way it was originally set up in the late 1700s and the early 1800s, we didn't vote for the president as a group politic, as an aggregate. We didn't vote for the president. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a democratic republic, a representative government. So the states would actually elect the electors, and those senators, and actually is more of the Congress people, were the ones responsible to the citizens for electing good electors. Now, different states, here's the beauty about the constitutional system we have, each and every individual state is supposed to be a sovereign, almost nation. It's the United States of America. The idea here is if you didn't like one state's politics, you could move. It's like moving to a different country. And each state had its own individual set of values, some good and some bad. We look at that, we look at the divide north and south for slavery, for example. That was the only way they were going to be able to band together against the English, but that's another conversation for another day. They eventually, out of one state decided to go ahead, I do not remember which one, decided to go ahead and start having the electors picked by popular vote. That became a very commonplace thing, and now today it is the norm. There are, I believe, at least two states that you can actually have different electors picked from different sections, but most states are popular vote, winner takes all. And what that does is those electors now go to the Electoral College and vote there. Simply put, the way we went from the states electing their own electors by Senate or Congress, state Senate or Congress, to popular vote was done through legislation. These states have their own individual laws on how these electors are supposed to be picked. And that is a set, defined rule set. The reason for that is, at the end of the day, we want to prevent disenfranchisement, fraud, and we want to have a rule of law system, a nice, well-tuned machine. Now, let's talk about ballot fraud, fake ballots, illegal ballots. Oh my goodness, I am so tired of hearing the term illegal ballots. Let's talk about what those are. They are fabricated ballots. Let me explain this. I shouldn't have to explain it, but every person should get one vote. If you are part of the United States of America, if you are, I'll speak for myself, part of the great state of Texas, I, John Arthur Fiala, should get one vote, right? My producer here should get one vote. And what that means is we've all decided on a system of rules. to say this is how we're going to represent our voice. If, let's say, my producer and I both put in a ballot, but then I go ahead and grab 5 more ballots out of my back pocket and shove them in. No one voted on those ballots but me. I filled them out. That is ballot fabrication. That is me saying his vote is worth 1 of 6 or 1 of 7 as opposed to 1 of 2. That's ballot dilution. We would call that immoral. We would call that actually heinous. So the problem is not illegal ballots. It's not like we're talking about illegals voting, although we could talk about that too. That's an interesting conversation, but that's not really the main point. The issue is, where did these ballots come from that there is no representation for whom they came from? And what I mean by that is mail-in ballots are an interesting concept. I've talked to folks, as someone who's actually gone downtown and worked the process of bringing in mail-in ballots, doing signature verification, making sure that someone didn't just go and steal someone's ballot, write down whatever they want, or as they do in a lot of old folks' homes, you'll find one person will go in, they'll be in the mailroom, they'll sign for all 400 or 1,000 ballots, their signature is on each one of them, and the old folks never get to vote. Those people were disenfranchised. They had their vote stolen. Doesn't matter which party you're from, we should all consider that egregious. Should be considered wrong, because it is. Voting by mail, most states have a 2 or even 3 envelope system. And the way that works is you have your ballot. You put your ballot in a privacy envelope so that it cannot be read. This is part of the secret ballot. It's something very important. It means that someone cannot be intimidated by their boss, by their peers, by a racial supremacist group or whatever to vote a certain way. Their vote is secret. So the secrecy ballot's important. It's a great thing. You take that secrecy ballot, or the secrecy envelope, excuse me, you put your ballot in the secrecy envelope, excuse me. That secrecy envelope goes in the signature envelope. You sign that. In some states, that now goes into a mail-in ballot. Now, the secrecy envelope and the signature envelope, which has to be actually typically signed and notarized by Notary Public. That way you're saying that this person does indeed live here. It's not fair if I'm voting in California and Michigan and living here in Texas, right? So those 2 numbers have to match. That's the purpose of having chain of custody on that ballot. That's what makes sure that that person's voice is heard and that it's not stolen from them. It's not taken away from them. That is something that we'll get to later, but that is a little quick primer on why mail-in ballots. It's very important to have the privacy and the signature envelope match. If not, there's chicanery afoot. You don't get a privacy envelope from here and a signature envelope from over here, and maybe the serials don't match. They match. That's the point. The point is, if you have 2 that don't match, that ballot needs to be cured because someone monkeyed with it. Someone did something that they were intentionally trying to damage, destroy, or even alter that person's ballot. There is no reason for those 2 not to match other than someone is intentionally sticking their hand in the system and disenfranchising individuals. So, with that said, again, I'm trying to keep this nonpartisan. I'm trying to keep this in the light of what is actually true, something that we look for in this program. What is truth? You always want to run towards the truth. In Philadelphia, we don't even have to look at the issue with the privacy envelope versus the slip, the signature envelope. We have, I believe it's 1.8 million requests for mail-in ballots. Fair enough. I'm always a fan of you actually receiving your mail-in ballot by hand from somewhere, but if you're voting absentee and you're disabled, what have you, that's great. That's why we have that. Good. However, the received mail-in ballots, let me explain this. The state of Philadelphia sent 1.8 million mail-in ballots. They sent those out. Those are all of the mail-in ballots in circulation. Those are the legitimate potential ballots that are out there. If you don't believe that there are any problems with the voter registration rolls, that's been called into question. I'll leave that out of the sake of the argument. Even if we take the voter registration rolls and we say that they're not duplicates, they're not dead people voting, which there are people who are long since deceased in some of these states. I'll jump for a moment to Arizona, where 32% of those who voted mail-in ballot are deceased. But let's jump back over to Philadelphia. Even if you take those voter rolls as correct and accurate, 2.5 million mail-in ballots were received by the state of Philadelphia. 2.5 million. 1.8 million were sent out. 2.5 million were received. The great state of Philadelphia didn't print in mail 2.5 million. They sent out 1.8. That is a difference of 700,000 votes that are not accounted for. There's a difference of 700,000 votes that are actually, God only knows who voted. And it doesn't, to me, while it does matter in the sense of a practical sense of who voted, the fact that there is a 700,000 vote discrepancy in a state, that is crazy. That is in addition to, like a banana republic, two parties are supposed to be watching the ballot counting. One party is kicked out and literally thrown out as though they are in some sort of third world country where you have a banana dictator running the show. That's in Philadelphia alone. You look at how things actually panned out in Philly and in Pennsylvania in general. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I notice I've been saying Philadelphia. I've been Philadelphia on the mind. I mean Pennsylvania. Excuse me, the great state of Pennsylvania. I am very tired. I've been working late. I apologize. The great state of Pennsylvania. Goodness. But with all of that to say, Pennsylvania sent out that many, 1.8 million, got back 2.5. We have whistleblowers in USPS who've been threatened. They've been cornered and threatened by federal officials after coming out and saying, we were told to backdate these envelopes to November 3rd. And we were doing this on November 5th. Whenever you have the government coming and threatening a whistleblower, that always gives me a moment of pause. That always gives me a question mark as someone who is naturally distrustful of government. But with that said, we'll go ahead and pick up on Pennsylvania in just another couple of moments. We have a quick commercial break. We'll hear from our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the other side. I hope you join us when we return on When Opinions Collide.
We work our whole lives to support our families. With one accident or illness, it can all be gone in an instant. Now there's a smart, affordable way to protect your family. Go to findhealthbenefits.com and discover low-cost life insurance for as little as $2 per month. Add to that a tax-deferred annuity that can help you protect your assets and grow your money for retirement. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094. A critical illness can strike without warning and wipe out your life savings. In fact, it's the #1 reason for bankruptcy. Find Health Benefits offers an affordable solution. Get up to $50,000 if you get cancer, stroke, or a heart attack, giving you the peace of mind to focus on getting better while the plan helps you to pay your bills and medical expenses. Learn more. Go to findhealthbenefits.com or call 877-235-6094. 66% of seniors spend more time shopping for cable TV than Medicare plans. Most say because it's just too confusing. Laws change every year. The wrong plan could cost you thousands and prevent you from seeing the doctors you want. Introducing FineHealthBenefits.com. Save time, save money, see specialists without referrals. Go to FineHealthBenefits.com or call 877-235-6094 for this informative brochure.
Society is on the edge. Let's bring them back. Edge Radio, because truth still matters.
We're back. So, thank you once again for joining us on When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, John Arthur Fiala, and getting back to Pennsylvania, kind of just wrapping up that thought train for just a moment. In Pennsylvania, we have a continuous systemic destruction of the voting integrity. Whenever you have one party that throws another party out of the voting location. By the way, the law of the state. Remember, we're going back to the reason for that Texas Supreme Court case. It's not to the Texas Supreme Court, it's going to the federal Supreme Court, but Texas is bringing it. I'll explain how that actually works in a little bit. But the reason they're bringing that is because these states violated their own laws. They violated their own laws, circumvented the legislature through judicial activism. Now, in Pennsylvania, we have a very, very clear-cut case. Statistically, the numbers just look rampantly fraudulent. Again, it almost doesn't matter who wins or loses this, as long as that corruption is not allowed to happen another election. All I want to see, and every American should want to see, is a fair voting system, a system that enables every voice to be heard, regardless of color, creed, gender, persuasion, whatever. You want everyone's voice to be heard, and you don't want anyone's voice to be diluted. Now, let's look at Michigan for another moment. Michigan is a really, really interesting case study because we had an incredible set of events at the TCF Center in the Cobo Hall, specifically in Detroit, where they were counting the ballots. It's a very, very interesting story, but you have a systemic destruction of the integrity of that vote there. And the reason you have evidence for this is you have hundreds of affidavits of folks who were in there attempting to simply view the vote. If you have a vote that is damaged, if you have a vote that comes in and for whatever reason has extra scribble marks on it, it's damaged or what have you, the natural process of counting that vote is you have to have a ballot duplication. In Michigan, that's how it goes, and most states have a similar process. The law states that you have to have a representative from each major party. I do not remember the number that constitutes a major party, but I'm sorry for my libertarian friends, 1% does not quite cut that bar. With that said, I'm sure you could actually put a representative there if you could find that many libertarians for the hundreds of counting tables. But someone sympathetic to libertarianism, take that jab as you will. With that said, a Republican and Democrat are supposed to be watching that. That is the law. You cannot actually have a valid election without a representative from each party. Now, at TCF Center, Cobo Hall, there may have been one or two out of hundreds of workers. Now, you might say, well, the Republicans just didn't show up. They just didn't want to. Well, there were hundreds of Republicans that requested to be put in, and they were told that they were replaced by non-partisan poll workers. Nonpartisan does not fit the state's legal requirement for that. That is what we call chicanery, folks. That is bad behavior and bad acting on one group who is intentionally trying to pull something. Don't tell me what, don't ask me what they're going to do, what they're trying. I would be equally as pissed if Republicans did that. Doesn't really matter which party is committing the fraud. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, whenever a Republican does something like that, it does happen. Republicans do stuff the ballot box. That occurs. They're immediately thrown out under the bus. Republicans, by and large, do not want to have a lick to do with them. By and large. If you find an exception, I want to hear it, actually. If a Republican is accepted after committing major widespread ballot fraud, or even a little. I do want to see that, because I actually want to raise Cain on them. Anyway, you have a systematic destruction of the integrity of the election there. Not just were those Republicans thrust out, but legally, duly appointed poll challengers. And what is a poll challenger, or what is a poll watcher? As someone who's been a part of that and worked with Democrat poll challengers, if you haven't figured it out, I am a conservative. I don't label myself a Republican, because I think the Republican Party is thoroughly corrupt, just as I think the Democrat Party is. I am a Christian and I'm a conservative. Take that as you will. But as someone who's worked as a either nonpartisan or a Republican poll challenger, different from a poll worker, these people typically aren't paid. They come in and they're like a court reporter. They sit in the room. They're not allowed to talk to any voter. In the case of TCF Cobo Hall in Detroit, there were no voters present in that center. It was the mail-in ballot counting. But you're not allowed to talk to the voter. You're only allowed to talk to the election staff and the judge, or in the case of Michigan, it would be the I believe it'd be the inspector is their title there. But what you're doing is you have a list of law and you say this comports with the law or this does not. And again, as someone who's worked with Democrat poll challengers or poll watchers, I love to have both sides of the table. That's the whole point. We want to watch, we want to make sure that no one is even just simply failing a simple task in comporting with the law. These poll challengers were systematically thrown out. The Detroit police would actually arrest people for simply asking questions. There were boxes in the back of the TCF that poll challengers would walk up to, and they would say, "What is this?" They were told, "Back the heck away, or you will be arrested." I'm self-censoring here. Later on, between 35,000 or 50,000, there were a couple of ballot dumps. It's interesting reading through these affidavits, which are publicly available. All of a sudden, these ballots came in during these ballot dumps that you saw on 4 a.m. on November 4th. these ballot dumps, some of them were pulled from underneath the table, a lot like Georgia, by the way. Georgia was pulled under the table. TCF Center, they were in the back. Some of these were pulled in from there. These boxes disappeared, etc. However, in the case of Michigan, you have multiple out-of-state drivers from, I believe, Indiana, Illinois. There might have been one from Ohio. I want to say Wisconsin. I don't remember all the different states. There were between 5 and 7 out-of-state plates that brought in ballots by the truckload. It's very interesting. It's like Pennsylvania, I was talking about earlier, where this one gentleman brought 140,000 or something. I forget the exact numbers. It was 100,000 and change ballots from New York to Philadelphia after the 3rd. And when he parked his truck, he parked his trailer, he got unhooked, left it for a little bit. This trailer was missing. Interesting. Things that make you go, But anyway, so all these ballots come in. Bulk majority of them are for one candidate. We're talking, some people say counts are 80, 100%, somewhere in that category. Some say 80, over 80, some people say 100, depending upon the affidavit you're reading. With that said, that should also comport really well with, I was going earlier, I was talking about the ballot duplication. Another interesting irregularity is all of the military ballots, as they came in, were duplicated almost invariably. By the way, you didn't have that bipartisan oversight. You only had people seeing what was taken away from the table, and only under severe duress. Some of these people were picked up, taken out of the Cobo Hall. One of them was driven a quarter mile and thrown out of the squad car on the ground and said, "Hey, you were disturbing the peace." All the guy did was say, "Hey, can I have a count of how many Republicans and Democrats there are versus nonpartisan? Can I have a counting of that?" Just for asking the question. He was chucked out, cited for disturbing the peace. Okay. 100% of those ballots that were coming out, the ones that were observed, we can only say what was observed, were for one candidate. Doesn't matter which candidate it is. That should disturb you. The fact that there's no bipartisan oversight, by the way, breaking the law, invalidating the integrity, at the very least, of the election. All of these ballots were duplicated. That means the old ballot was destroyed, and no secondary witness got to see what was on that ballot. That would be like me taking someone else's ballot as a poll worker. This is what occurred. Coming over here, doing this, folding it up, and saying, that's how they voted. That doesn't raise an eyebrow for you? We'll talk about it more on the other side of this break. Thanks for joining. This is When Opinions Collide. I'm your host, Jonathan Fiala.
The Natural Nation Network is really about taking control of your health physically, spiritually, emotionally, even intellectually, because there's so much out there in misinformation. There's a lot of people now that are suffering from all sorts of diseases that they really wouldn't have to suffer for if they had better information. And that's what we're here to do. Provide information that can save lives.
The mind and the body are totally connected.
Health can be really serious, and sometimes we just have to lighten it up a little bit while we're still providing substantive information.
And my sort of mantra on the salsa dance floor is kind of similar. I tell somebody, if you make a mistake twice, it becomes a move. Okay?
Tune into Natural Nation every Tuesday at 11 a.m.
Are you a small business owner concerned about the downturn in the economy? Top business leaders like Mattress Mac and Warren Buffett will tell you that now is the time to promote your business more than ever. People need your services. Your business needs an edge. Learn about special advertising packages for small businesses right here on Edge Radio. Find out more, give us a call at 281-744-0446. That's 281-744-0446. Edge, because truth still matters.
Well, we're back. So thank you once again for joining us on Vince Glad. I'm your host, Jonathan Fiala, and we've been talking a little bit of election. Been talking about some of the different irregularities. And so what does it all boil down to? We'll get to that. But in just a moment, remember I was talking about the importance of those mail-in ballots, how you have a privacy envelope that goes inside a signature envelope. Those two have to match. If they've been opened and that envelope has been repurposed or forged or whatever, there is no reason for that. Those two are sent together so that we have the will of that person maintained. Well, we were talking about Michigan and what's going on at Cobo Hall in the TCF Center. And actually, there's leaked data. This needs to be confirmed, and I'm just going to say this. It does need to be confirmed, the veracity of this recording, but there's recording talking about election training where individuals would actually, they were told to tape over, put a Post-it note over the label, over the barcode, and hand write in the number that matched the inside privacy slip. That's what we call ballot forgery. If you are doing that and not holding that vote and saying, whose vote was this, where's the correct vote, if you're not holding that vote and making sure that that person's vote is accurately counted, but instead you are forging someone's ballot, that is actually no different than writing in on someone's ballot and putting in whatever. That is, we're talking about ballot forgery. We're talking about subverting the will of the people. That's all we're talking about. That's a serious problem. That's something that says there's fraud afoot. And if that's being trained at a systemic level, it's a serious issue. And again, I say that this video, and I should have had some ready to play for y'all, but maybe next time. This video has the instructor actively teaching folks how to forge these ballots. Now, that video would mean nothing without evidence, but the thing is we actually do have evidence of this. We have eyewitness testimony. We're talking in the dozens of people who saw independently, they saw people writing over, sticking over, and writing the number, forging the number on there. It's hard to come up with a charitable explanation for this. It's almost as though someone systemically decided that they wanted to subvert the will of the people, to disenfranchise a population. I was talking with my producer off break. I don't care what they look like, who they are, or what they believe in. If they're an American and they're voting, they deserve one vote, one voice, accurately heard. That is all that I care about. And I think we can all eventually come to an agreement on that. At the end of the day, we just want a fair election. We want a fair process as much as is possible. Otherwise, it's a matter of who cheats the most. And that's not a healthy thing for society. But not only would these ballots, the signature envelopes, be taped over and fabricated, but we have eyewitness testimony of stacks of ballots being run through the tabulator at least 5 times per stack. And these were so hand-picked. They were sat there, picked them out one at a time. Not only were they forged by putting that on there, they looked at them, forged the signature envelope, they stacked these up, then they fed them through the tabulator multiple times. Not once, multiple times. Now, that should give any patriot pause. You should say, if they can do that to them, they can do that to me. Doesn't matter who's doing it, who's it being done to, it just matters that it's happening to Americans. It matters that we are actually destroying the process and that our republic cannot stand up underneath that. Now, the question of who's doing it, we can talk about folks who have ties to China, folks who are actively being bedded down by Chinese spies, or at least sure were, looking at you, Eric Swalwell. But let's talk about the election specifically. This election is, in the grand scheme of things, immaterial. If every election after it is held with honor and integrity, this election is immaterial. If this election sets the precedent, however, for consistent abuse of the structure, it doesn't matter what we say. It only matters what happens at the ballot box. Stalin once said, I don't care who votes, I only care who counts the votes. Wise man, in addition to being one of the most villainous scumbags to ever roam the earth, having tens of millions of people to his name. By the way, primarily conservatives and Christians in Russia, but that's, again, another topic for another day. Now, let's talk about intent. I don't like to attribute intent, so what I'll do is I'll look at some of these affidavits that I got here from Michigan. Some of these, again, are public source. But you've got people who are brought in to be part of the process. And because they have a Republican tag, they're omitted from entering. The response is that they are at COVID capacity, right? That's the response that we've heard. And we actually have a Daniel Baxter, the election supervisor for Cobo Hall at the TCF Center in Detroit, who said, well, if one party doesn't sign out, then that's on them. It's too bad. You're filled up at capacity. It's kind of a harsh move, but okay. If you take that at face value, I can see where that's politically ugly and shenanigans. Okay, gotcha. Going to be that way. But let's take other affidavits. We're talking half a dozen or a dozen that specifically mention Mr. Baxter as either the election coordinator or by name, where he was on the inside And he saw the Detroit Police Department actually actively blocking people from being able to sign out, even though they requested. And they were escorted out the side door. This is not the activity of a free nation. That is the workings of a banana republic. When one party is prevented from viewing the voting process while exclusively the opposition gets to count the votes, that should give anyone pause. Because again, in a free and open society, if you have nothing to hide, why not let everyone view the process within the confines and expectations of the law? I personally have no problem with Democrat poll challengers or Democrat or Republican or independent poll workers being present. In fact, I welcome it. I want to have the diversity of opinion all surrounding the ballot box so that we can all look at it and say at the end of the day, this person was fairly and duly elected. And that's the end of it. We support our democratic republic. That's what we do. I'm fine with it. And if Joe Biden won fair and square, he is my president. If he won through the most sophisticated election fraud machine ever devised, his words, not mine, you can actually find that, then I do have a problem with that. I have a problem with Trump when he says, if I shot someone on Fifth Avenue, my base would still support me. Okay? I have a problem when politicians say egregious things and think they can get away with this garbage. I do. I really do. But the thing with Biden is that it looks material. You've got people like this Daniel Baxter who on one hand are telling people one story outside, and on the other hand, he's part of an active systemic enforcement of removing one party from the counting area. By the way, violating the law of the election. That is Michigan law. By the way, every state effectively that I know of has that law, and for good reason. This prevents minorities, this prevents different thought groups from being tread upon. That's why we originally came up with all of these election laws. It's because we saw that the majority in certain areas was able to oppress the minority. We did this to even the playing field, and it's a good system. We should keep it. Voter suppression and voter intimidation, electioneering, these have all been done by the same party. By and large, if you want to look at it, the largest group of people doing it have been the same ones since the Civil War. Since before even, if you want to be candid. A lot of whites were tarred and feathered and lynched because they supported abolition. It's not about skin color. It's not about race or creed. It's about right or wrong. That's what we need to be looking at as we go through this. Now, with that said, Michigan had a ton of other things going on, including large groups of people who were born. We're talking long lists, not spattered, long lists of 1900 on the 1st of January, 1/1/1900. When one poll watcher, or challenger, I believe they're called up there, asked about this, I believe one of them was removed for asking this question. He said, why are you inputting a date? Well, we don't have a voter date of birth for this person. We just got to put it in. You don't have a voter date of birth for this person? We're looking for American citizens. That's where you take the ballot and you send it to be cured. And we do that in an effective, speedy process. That's what we do with that. We take that person's vote and we say, is this a legitimate voter who's actually a human being, or is it a fictitious character that I just pulled out of my pocket to subvert my producer's vote, as we talked about earlier? If I put a vote in and he puts a vote in and I produce 5 more ballots and stuff them in there, that's not the system we agreed on. Otherwise, he would have come with 10. Am I right? That's how I mean, that's where we go. That's where we get to on this. So instead of creating the best fraud, most sophisticated fraud machine ever devised, how about we actually try to win hearts and minds and change people's minds? Now, we can talk about Arizona. We could talk about Georgia. Georgia with the water main break. I don't know what that is. We could talk about that. We could talk about the ballots that are pulled out from underneath the table. But let's talk about Dominion. Yes, let's talk about Dominion. Dominion voting. Sidney Powell's bone she's going after. I will say something. I find it very interesting that weighted races are in the instruction manuals for Dominion. This isn't Alex Jones talking about the frogs turning gay. This is in the official printed materials of Dominion voting, where you can actually weight a race. And their response to this was, well, if you have land ownership or if you have stockholdership in a company and you have our voting machines in there, certain people can get a higher percentage of the vote. So say I've got Bill over here and I'm right here. Bill has more land, therefore he gets a 1.25 vote for every 1 vote that comes in, and I get a 0.75 vote. Okay, that's very well and good. If you're voting based on land restrictions or doing some cockamamie something or other for an HOA. What HOA actually has voting machines anyway? But doesn't matter. Cool system, it's interesting. But why on earth do we have fractional votes in the presidential election? We have votes where we have fractions of voters. That would suggest that a weighted system is in place. In fact, some of the election equipment that has been seized, we now materially know that on election day, certain candidates not only started with 35,000 right out the gate. By the way, you can see these graphs and these spikes. You go to any of these hearings in any of these states, and you can see the charts that are simply data flow of information. And you can see in Arizona where you get a bump of 35,000 votes for each candidate on one side of the ticket. Okay? I don't think I have to tell you which side of the ticket it is, but that's okay. Goes along, and then you see votes go up and up. And by the way, there is a limitation to these voting machines. How this works is you have a tabulator. You take a stack of ballots, like I alluded to earlier, you sit it on the tabulator, and it goes, sucks them all up, spits them out, and says, 49 votes counted, X amount for this person, X amount for that person, yada, yada. Well, in Michigan, in some of the Arizona, in Pennsylvania, where, by the way, Trump actually lost votes. We're talking, well, we'll get to that in a minute. But in some of these places where you actually have votes that are tabulated, and this enormous rate, we've all seen the fraud graph, right? Where you have the 2 little bars going up, and all of a sudden one goes straight up and over like this, right? And then all of a sudden it pans out, looks like a child drew it. What happened there? Well, here's an interesting thing about Dominion voting machines. You can store votes on USB thumb drives. In fact, you can actually create these. You can also tell people to vote via the green button, and a lot of people were told that. These are now, if you hit the green button on a Dominion machine, we don't have them in Texas because these things were considered so terrible that Texas wouldn't buy them. But you hit the green button, and that vote is saved as a provisional ballot. By the way, all of those ballots that the green button were hit on, someone can come by afterward and say, I think all of these voters meant to vote this way. That is in the Dominion voting manual. By the way, open source. Fact check me, please. So, with that said, you can also take votes from one of these machines via USB drive. You can rack up as many as you want. You can even create the file. And by the way, you can delete votes as well. Interesting. You can pull this USB, plug it in. In fact, that's actually how a lot of votes are transmitted. That also suggests that's how these bumps occurred when there was no scheduled influx of data or information. And if someone had that USB drive and were willing to talk about when that occurred in all of these different states, I'm sure they would. But the inflow of ballots cannot do that. That has to be someone actively plugging in votes. Now, were these votes legit? It's an interesting question. I want to know. I really want to know. That's all I want to know. I want to have a proper explanation of where they came from. I want to have an explanation of this is the will of this county, of this group of people. These people all said, I voted this way. You find that for me? And it pans out? I'm pretty satisfied with that. That's fine. As long as it is a legitimate vote. Someone's will was represented by each and every individual one of those, I'm good to go. Not one person's will being represented over across, say, 100,000 votes, or one group. Now, that brings me down to the Texas Supreme Court case. Montana, North and South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Utah, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia, and Indiana have all said, hey, you guys broke your laws and interfered with a federal election. How does a state have the right to sue another state on that? Well, that's a good question. I'm glad you, my viewer, asked. Texas has the right, as any other state does, when another state has actually offended them in a material way on a federal level, they are able to come via Article 3 of the Constitution and bring a lawsuit saying you have actually harmed my vote. And again, the way this Texas lawsuit goes, and I am looking at it online right now. I apologize for being so rude. I'm reading off the internet at the moment. It's readily available. They have a three-prong case. The separation of powers provision of the elector's cause is a structural check on the government that safeguards liberty. Kind of an introductory clause, right? Stripping away of safeguards from voting by mail-in ballots exacerbates the risks of fraud. I'm with that. As someone who's had to count that, I get it. But the third one is the really interesting one. The bill of complaint alleges that the defendant states unconstitutionally abolished critical safeguards against fraud by voting in mail. None of these states were allowed to count the way they did, how they did, by their own laws. They did this by judicial fiat. And some people may ask, is this sore loser syndrome? Well, that's a really good question. And it seems every election since Bush and Gore, we've had sore losers. It could be. I don't know. I'll speak for myself. If I have confidence in the integrity of the election, if I actually know that voting machines are not being tampered with, that my vote isn't worth a fraction as opposed to someone else's vote just because of the candidate I picked, I'm part of the American experiment. I'm more than happy to endure 4 years of a pedophile supporting president who got away with it, got away with tax evasion, got away with whoring himself out to the Chinese Communist Party, and it's been wrong on every single foreign policy. You know what? I'll endure that. I'll endure that for the sake of our republic. I will. I don't like the guy. I'll call him Mr. President if he actually won the vote. Even if it turns out that he's a lying guy who actually created the most sophisticated voter fraud machine and apparatus to date, his words, not mine, I might still call him Mr. President, just because I do respect the office. I might get a little sick when I do it, but I might. With that said, all I want to see is a fair, honest election. I don't want to go back to the days where certain groups did not get a fair vote. We fought the Civil Rights Act to do that. We wanted to make sure that everyone had a fair vote. By the way, Martin Luther King Jr., Republican. Just saying. Lincoln, such as he is, flawed character, Republican. Just saying. With all that to say, go ahead, write us your concerns, your hate mail, everything at Opinions Collide on the Twitter. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Let us know what we should talk about next time. I've been promising for a long time to get Robin and Bethany back on. I'll try to get them. Everyone's schedules have been crazy lately. I'm so sorry for not having had a normal live show in a while. Been very busy, but appreciate y'all. Love y'all. You guys have a mighty fine day, and God bless you.